I'd like to call this special meeting of the Board of Finance to order. It's April 20th at 7:30 p.m. and we're in room 119 of the Darien Town Hall. First item on the agenda, as always, is public comment. Have we received any comments?
We have not.
Okay. And we have some guests here in the audience who are here to talk about items on our agenda. So given that there is no public comment, we'll move up to the first action item on our agenda. And that's to discuss and take action on the special appropriation for Gorham's Pond Dam repair design in the amount of $160,000. If you recall, this $160,000 design for the dam and portion of the floodgates and so forth that was ruined about a year ago in connection with the storm came before us, I think, 2 months ago, in terms of looking for this appropriation. And a bunch of us had questions and so forth related to the lease, whether or the ownership of the dam and the lease of the dam, and we wanted to get some better understanding of our actual control, custody, care, and responsibilities of that before we actually made this appropriation. So I know Jen worked with our attorneys and Ed and so forth, and they have some background information on that. So Wayne, if you guys want to. Will the microphones pick them up over here?
Yep.
Okay.
Microphones are right up there.
Good evening. Thank you for having us. Nice to see you. We don't get together with your board on a regular basis, so it's nice to get together with a group and identify faces with names. A couple of things to start out with. Number one, we had previously distributed, I think through Jen, copies of the actual lease. We have for us additional copies in case you wanted one. In addition, Jen had mentioned to us that you would like us to prepare a brief outline as to what the process would be if in fact we decided, or you decided, or the town decided to proceed on eminent domain. We have that for you also. Let me say initially, and then I'm going to let Patty get into a little bit more, I'm dealing with it more intently than I have, fortunately, I'm happy to say. But number one, we do have a lease which expires next year. Under that lease, we have an obligation. We have an obligation to repair and maintain the dam, to repair and maintain the floodgates. I think that, and we looked at your last meeting and saw the questions that you were concerned about. I think that answers directly those questions. The damage, and I know Ed can go into this in more detail if you wish, the damage to the dam, the damage to the gates occurred while we were under our watch, so to speak, while we were the lessee of that property. So to answer your specific question, we do have a direct obligation to repair them. I would also say to you that I do feel badly that it has taken so long to get to the bottom of this issue, but it has taken an inordinate amount of time to get a survey done, which is still not complete, but which will be completed shortly. And in addition, the title search, I think because of the nature of the ownership and going back many generations of family to determine who owned or had an interest in the property at that time, has taken the title search much more time than we had expected it would. It's taken months. They have come across some additional deeds, Patty, you can explain in a little more detail, which will allow them to complete that title search and allow the surveyor to complete the survey. Why don't you give me a little more background on that, Patty?
Sure. As you may have seen if you've read the lease, the original landlords were 7, or I think actually 9 individuals of the Gorham family, different branches of the Gorham family. And that was back in 1920 when this was executed. Since that time, we did searches of the land records, but through the land records, we've only been able to trace by deeds one partial interest in the dam. The majority of the descendants are not found in the land records. The title did not pass that way. And because some of these people were, even in 1920, not based in Connecticut, there's a very good possibility that their interest passed through some sort of probate proceeding in another jurisdiction. So we have been in contact with the property investigator to see if he can figure out where they are currently, who those heirs might be, and I should be able to know shortly whether that's a doable search. But it's been 100 years, and probate proceedings are not as conclusive as land records. not everything passes by document because of code. So, the one line, I should say, of interest we did trace were to the current neighbors that are on that Rings End Road. They have a partial interest. How much that interest is, they have a different number than our title searcher provided, but it's less than majority and significantly less, anywhere from either 15% or 7% of what the title was back in 1920. So that's still a significant number of people that could have an interest in that dam. But the people who do own it are aware that the leases, the people that we have located, the neighbors are aware that the lease is, going to expire next year, and they're happy with the lease the way it is, and have indicated to me that they're comfortable with proceeding with it again. But again, they're not a majority of the title that we can find.
One of the decisions the town will eventually have to make is whether or not it is more practical, realistic, to attempt to locate folks that have an interest in this lease and extend that lease, or is it more appropriate for us to institute the process under eminent domain and take control of it in that way?
What was the range of interest that we think, or the title search thinks, and the resident thinks they have?
I think the resident thinks that they may have as much as 25%, but our title searcher thinks it's somewhere between 7 and 15 based on what he was able to find for probate documents here in Connecticut, which is not a complete tracing of all the years.
So Patty, if you were to draw a deed map of the town of Darien, you would find a big black hole where the bridge is?
I'm sorry, if you were...
To draw a deed map, a land plat, another way of basically telling who owns what land in Darien, you would find a big black hole where the bridge is, other than the 15 or 25%?
You would, basically right now, yes. I mean, one of the issues we've had with the survey is we can't find a document until just recently, we did find it finally, that actually had a meets and bounds description of the dam. In almost all these documents, it's simply referred to as Gorham's Dam. So it's not even, we're not even able to describe that property, which would be one of the steps we would have to do if we were to proceed with eminent domain. So we would need to be able to delineate it in order to proceed that way. So,
But you are now able to delineate it? Is that what?
we found a deed from the one document that we did find. We traced it back, and we found a deed in that chain of title to like the 1930s that has meets and bounds in it that the surveyor is now looking at and trying to incorporate in his previous work.
That should help the surveyor dramatically to being able to put together a meaningful survey.
When you referred to necessary repairs, what standard of repair? In other words, are we supposed to repair it so it's like new, or repair it so it's still serviceable, and if serviceable, for how long?
What I mentioned to Ed when we spoke with him earlier today, these dams throughout the state are in theory supposed to be listed with DEEP. And interestingly enough, this dam is listed. And this dam is listed as, was it double A plan?
Double A.
Which indicates that it is now in very good condition. Now, that was probably done before the storm, the damage. But I think it's got to be in a condition whereby if that dam is supporting the bridge, that it is in such condition that it will continue to support the bridge and is safe for travel by the citizens of this community. I think that would be a determination for engineers such as Ed to make that determination.
So you're not worried about the level of water on the other side of the bridge?
I believe the last time Ed took a look at it, which is fairly recently, he was satisfied that the bridge is still in usable and reasonably good condition.
Let me question about the lease. I mean, it seems like from your memo and what I was able to discern and trying to read the script, it appears like it's effectively like a joint and several type lease. So if there was to be any sort of modification, termination, amendment, extension, or anything, you need all, I guess, 9 parties to sign?
Yes, to do it by, I would think, yes. I haven't found any authority that would allow just the partial owners to go and do that.
Yeah. And so if one route kind of traced us back to somewhere between, I guess, 7 and 15, and another route traced us back to one other landowner, and some of them, it appears as though just a lot of references to New York and so forth that may not have been landowners that actually owned it. So we can't trace them through our records. It's just individuals who, in some cases, lived in New York. It seems like this route, while interesting, if the only success is getting to 100% for effectively a joint and several lease, it seems like that's going to be, I would say, likely futile in terms of getting 100% consent.
My
And
opinion,
then-
my opinion would be that it would, and Patty, if you just briefly say so, that it would be cleaner and more realistic to go by way of eminent domain, rather than attempting to find folks that you may or may not find, and raise some questions that Johnny Jones is gonna come forward sometime in the future and say, wait a second, I have an interest in it, I can prove it, or my grandfather had an interest in it, and I want, I don't agree with what you're doing, I don't agree with the lease.
So is it the case that that process would actually, by trying to seek eminent domain would bring people, would give notice and so forth, and people would be able to come out to us rather than we trying to find them, similar to the way you do in a probate type?
I think that would be the hope,
Proceeding?
and then that would happen. That would be, if we can't find these people, the best we can do, and the statute allows for it, for us to give notice, publish notice of what's happening, so that hopefully someone who has an interest in it would become aware of it.
But precedent to that, you also have to show the court that you took reasonably diligent effort to locate the addresses for those unknown people. So that's why I think it would be worthwhile probably to at least have an initial look-see by a private PI, so that you can make that showing to the court.
That we attempted to locate them.
Yeah.
And we don't want to go on a joyride here to spend as much money as we can to go through the records of all the probate jurisdictions we're doing here in New York. But I think as a practical matter, we have to make some good faith attempt, if only locally, to make a determination as to who they may be.
Yeah. Well, I guess when I think about this, there's sort of two different work streams. There's one, we needed to confirm whether or not we have care, custody, control, ownership, lease, hold interest, or so forth in this, and whether or not we can actually expend town funds and so forth, and whether or not we're obligated to fix it. It sounds like from the lease, we are.
I would agree with
And
that.
albeit there's a year and 10 months left in the lease, we're obligated even if it's the last day, right? Given that this happened sort of last year. So it seems as though there's one, bless you, our responsibility to fix it and the need to move forward with it just because it's a town-owned asset that we need to fix. And the second one is, it appears that 10 months from now, we need to sort of get this bigger issue fixed out so that we can determine in terms of how we move forward with this asset.
I think there's no doubt, and Ed certainly can speak for himself, I don't think there's any doubt that the dam was badly damaged as a result of the storm. But the temporary repair that's been done by Ed and his office has corrected that, at least in part. So I think for now, it is safe to say this is still a viable and safe bridge to use and to go over.
But I think this is, you want to get the design started so that we can get the permanent fix before
Yes.
something else comes and hits the temporary repairs.
But again, my question is to what degree are you going to do repairs? Do you need to do repairs to effectively last, 100 years, the next 100 years, the next 5 years, the next 50 years? Is there a difference in the degree of repair that you would propose if you had a different time frame? In other words, do we have to spend money as much money as it will take to restore the bridge and the dam and all the abutments and everything to full long-term functionality, or do we need to do something less?
Let me speak. to
And
that.
what happens
I think
if-
it's important to understand that when you go to do the dam repair, or you go to design a bridge or a building, there isn't a level of factor of safety you can adjust. Okay, so we're going to design that bridge or that dam to be serviceable, and so as long as it will last as long as it possibly can. That's the idea. I mean, we're going to place stones out there, we're going to have revetment put in front of it, we're going to cap it with concrete again, there'll be some reinforcement in it. That's just a standard. I can't take the steel away to say, okay, we can save some money, but it'll still last almost as long. That's really not how it works. So we're going to go back and put it back in its serviceable condition that it was before the storm.
I think that was, that you did do repairs on the bridge to restore that. We're worried about the dam and the future damage it could do to the structure of the bridge if it wasn't repaired, right?
Well,
In looking at the two together, is what you have to do right now. I have to assume that if that dam was to be removed, there may be some issues with the bridge abutments that are in place. I have to make that assumption. I can't say I don't think it'll have any impact at all. Unless I do some in-depth studies. I think Wayne and I spoke about that today. There's not an engineer that could sit here and tell you that right now. One doesn't impact the other. Not without doing some in-depth engineering analysis to it, doing soil borings, actually doing some diving, excavate along the footings and the abutments to see if they are connected, to see if they are together. And I can tell you some of it where the fish ladder was connected and drilled into the bridge abutment to keep it in place. So there is a section that is connected.
Perhaps it's the difference between you and qualified engineer and me, an amateur accountant, basically saying, you want to do the very best job and come up with a gold-plated bridge, and I don't blame you for that. And I want a bridge that will barely stand up for the length of time, but in fact never fail during that period.
Well, yeah, I think your point is that we have 10 months left in the lease, and so if this was a car that we're going to be returning to BMW in 10 months, it'd be a different, something they might do, but this is going to be a bridge that I think, regardless of the exercise that we can or maybe should go through to make sure we secure this for the next 100, 200 years, we probably need to fix this long-term, because I'm sure, like, if there are state inspections and so forth, they're not going to say you can do this because it'll last for the 10 months you have left in the lease versus...
I think it comes down though to the purpose of the dam. Like, why was the dam installed? Was it to protect the bridge, or was it to create a lovely waterway to look at? Because if it's the latter, I think there's a question next year, if we own another eminent domain, that is that the town's responsibility or not? Like, I agree the town has a responsibility to maintain safe passage over the bridge, but if the dam is not for that purpose, then I question it beyond the end of the lease.
Yeah, but the lease is on the bridge, the dam, the entire...
We own the bridge.
We lease the bridge,
And
right?
we have responsibility
No, we
to
lease the
maintain it,
dam.
right?
We lease the dam.
We
lease
own the
dam.
bridge, we lease the dam.
Correct.
Yes.
And you've already said that there's a connection in place.
Yeah.
In order to go further, you need in-depth engineering, underwater studies.
There'd be some in-depth analysis doing that, and that's still, it wouldn't be inconclusive, but it would be fully conclusive.
It would not be fully
It
conclusive.
would be hard to get to where the dam and the bridge come together. You'd be under the front edge, but you'd never get along those abutments where that concrete is poured.
And it'd almost be perhaps trial and error as to whether or not the bridge functions without a properly functioning
Yeah,
dam.
I wouldn't do
Which
any
we wouldn't want
destructive-
to-
I wouldn't
which we
do any
would not
destructive testing.
advocate,
There
right.
would be no destructive testing out there to see if it fails, that,
No, I'm saying
The
the
trial and error
passage
part.
of time.
Yes.
Passage of time.
And to be honest with you, I think the dam repairs itself are pretty straightforward if you look at it from an engineering standpoint. We have to pull some stones out, we have to put some footings back, we have to put the stones back, and we have to recap it. Basically, that's putting the dam back in place. Now, it's extensive because we're dealing with tides. We're going to deal with shoring that's out there. We have some issues with weather that usually kind of creeps into our schedule, into the design. So those are issues that we'll have to take under consideration, of course.
And to your question regarding the dam being there, my understanding is that it's a historic dam. But it's been there since the founding of the town, essentially. And it has some historic significance to the beginnings of this town. And may even be like in the town seal, I think, or the circular picture that you see on town, that may be that dam.
Has anyone approached the Friends of Gorham Pond to find out what they might know?
I know there was a Gorham's Pond Association many years ago, back in the I've seen documents from like the 60s or something, or maybe even the 50s, about who was responsible for letting releasing the water when there was hot, backup water. Was it the sluiceway or the floodgates?
Floodgates,
Yeah.
floodgates.
And who was responsible for actually operating them? And it was Gorham's Pond Property Association, but I haven't seen any reference to them, and I couldn't find any current listing of them anywhere, so I don't know whether they just dissolved or what happened.
Well, the Friends of Gorham's Pond does exist, I know that, because I deal with them on a regular basis, because they call us to open up the tide gates
Okay.
twice a year, to remind us to do it, not that we have to be reminded, we have it scheduled, but it's the phone call, the email from them, so there is a group down there. I don't know how much knowledge the newer group has, I can tell you, I've met with a couple of them over the last couple of years. Some of the documents Patty has is some of the documentation they gave us, so I passed that on to her to use too.
Patty has spoken to some of the immediate neighbors as recently as today,
Mhm.
and asked what information they may have, but I don't think they were terribly helpful. Not that they didn't want to be helpful, they just didn't have a lot
Well,
of information.
I'm waiting to see what I get, so.
If we see somebody constructing a toll booth,
See, you got here from the state of Connecticut.
Well, yeah, the issue is, I mean, you made it clear we own the bridge. The problem is the bridge sits on their dam,
Correct. That's it exactly.
which is probably why we signed a 99-year lease
Right.
on the dam.
Correct.
So, I mean, I don't know, I guess, my opinion is the whole structure, I'm not the engineer, but generally looks like it's connected and sort of one and the same and functions together. The way it was built today, like, could it have been rebuilt at a different time to have them be separate and not have to coexist? It just seems like they do now. And if we need to get this fixed, because if the dam were to continue to deteriorate, I guess the closer it gets to the bridge, that deterioration moves back, then the risk is what happens. So, and I guess maybe it's important for the public to know, it's not like just 160,000 we're talking about in terms of the design of the bridge, or the 14 or 15 that we've spent on the temporary repairs. It's the fact that this, at least like the high level estimate of what the repairs could be would be in the $1 million to $1.2 million range.
Yeah.
So it's probably something that we would need or want to bond. And so I think that's why I think we're, investigating, making sure that we know sort of what our control is of this dam. And I think,
To your point about the funding, I know I spoke to Jen about that today, because I want to get my head wrapped around how this thing is going to play out. It was filed with our insurance company as damage. I don't know if we have heard back from them on their inspection and report on whether it's going to be included in any type of restoration payments. There are opportunities for whatever is not covered by insurance. If nothing is covered at zero, there's still an opportunity for FEMA to pick up some of it, if not all of it. And then, to your point, if the town would have to go however you wanted to fund it, if you wanted to fund it, bonding would be an option. So that's kind of where I have my head wrapped around. Jen, tell me if I'm wrong there.
No, you're correct.
how long would it take to go through the eminent domain process?
I would figure it would take a good 6 months to a year.
Yeah, it moves pretty quickly once
There are different steps you have to follow, some of which we've already started, quite frankly.
Right. There would have to be a vote authorizing the purchase, and if the purchase can't be accomplished within 6 months, then a condemnation can be started. There have to be good faith efforts to negotiate, which includes trying to locate owners and not being able to. And then you file a notice for the statement of compensation, so you need to get an appraisal for the value of the dam. And then upon filing that, you have to serve notice, either by publication or upon the people you have identified. And then the court, within, I think, 35 to 90 days after returning the service to court, will issue a certificate of taking, which gets filed on the land records.
And that gives you ownership. When that is filed, you own it. That's the last
Do we
step.
do we not have to pay for it,
You have to put the money up and deposit it with the court, the statement of compensation, the fair market value that you found through the appraisal.
So the fair market value is established, and then if anyone shows up, there's a process to determine what percentage of the property they own. And
go to court and
assuming
seek
this
their
one, assuming this individual does show up for that, then we'd have to adjudicate their percentage, somehow marry that difference,
The court
and
would
then
need to
they would
satisfy
receive a
itself.
cash payment for that.
That is correct. The court would need to satisfy itself that this individual, group of individuals had an ownership interest, what it was, and what portion of that money that the court now holds they are entitled to be paid.
Right, okay.
Do we know ballpark, and I apologize if this was in some of the materials and I missed it, how much have we spent to maintain the dam over the last like 10 or 20 years? Is this like a regular thing?
I've
or-
only been here 8, so I'll go from what I know that way, and I know there was some small work done on the tide gates themselves, but as far as the dam, we haven't done, as far as I can recall, any major work to that dam other than the fish ladder and the corrective measures on the surface. And
I think it was
can't
an
tell you-
unusual storm with unusual velocity that created the damage to the dam. I don't think that's been common over the last multiple years. I don't think it's occurred on a regular basis. It may in the future with the weather changing the way it is, but I don't think it had in the past.
Okay.
And with that said, some of our design features or changes that we're gonna make to that front end of the dam, hopefully will address increased velocities and flows if storms were to continue to be that large or grow to be that large.
So, Ed, for this appropriation of the 160,000 here, how long will it take for them to come up with what the actual design plan is?
The company that we're gonna be using, Fuss O'Neill, has already been out there, they've looked at it, helped us through the original process, so they're ready to start going. They gave us a design delivery dates of anywhere between 3 to 4 months to get us to the point where we can submit for permitting to the DEP, Army Corps, Long Island Sound. That permitting process can take anywhere between 3 to 6 months to approve. We're hearing closer to 3 only because it is they'll consider it an emergency, because they allowed us to do the emergency repairs. After that, there's a bidding process, usually takes 1 to 2 months between the bidding, opening them up, getting a contract, awarding it, so there's some flex there. So we're looking at possibly starting construction anywhere between 7 to 11 months from now. Which I probably won't want to do the work in the middle of winter or towards the end of winter. So sometime, maybe this time next year, I'll be looking to work on that dam if everything was to go smoothly.
Okay.
The decision to pursue eminent domain that's a Board of Selectmen decision, not a Board of Finance decision. Is that accurate?
Board of Selectmen and RTM.
An RTM. Have you been before the Board of Selectmen with respect to this eminent domain
Not this-
question? Because you came to us right after the Board of Selectmen originally, so, okay, so this hasn't been back before the Board of
It has
Selectmen.
not, no, sir.
Well, and maybe, we raised a question on, do we own it or do we lease it?
Right.
I guess, 2 things, I guess, where my head is at is that we should be approving this money for the design, we're responsible for doing it. As it relates to ensuring that we have this asset for the town's use going forward, if it is going to be an eminent domain, ultimately that's some form of a purchase. If one person that you're taking eminent domain from can exist or can be found, then some type of purchase. And then what I would say is we should maybe cease discussion of that around this table, and that type of land purchase should go back to the Board of Selectmen, and I know that is.
And also back to you folks, if we get to that point,
Right.
it may well be that we want to go into executive session when we discuss that
Yes.
issue.
Right.
I don't think it's necessary this evening, but at some point we may be back to seeking approval of funds to do just that, in which case we should probably have an executive session.
Right.
So, yeah, so that would be my recommendation, go back to the Board of Selectmen, work with them, have the discussions that you would with any other potential land purchase.
Exactly.
But that's independent of the decision to fund the
Yeah.
repair
Yes,
design.
I think it's a decision we, the town, need to make in the not-too-distant future, one way or the other.
Agreed.
So you said you found like 15% maybe of the ownership. Does it have to be 100 to re-execute a lease, or does it need to be 51?
Well, the risk is if you do it with only 51, somebody could show up and say, I should have been a part of that, so.
So it doesn't matter that they would be, like, there's no voting kind of.
No, unless the one, they can show that they somehow have authority from those other lines of interest.
Is there some form of notice that can be filed, public notice?
Probably publication
Yes.
is one that I have found over the years, one that the court most often uses if you can't find a person or an organization.
But isn't that effectively what the eminent domain process is?
Yes.
It's the process you're setting forward is very similar to a probate
Yes.
process where you're
You try to locate the people.
you're putting an action out there in public, looking for people to come forward.
The good part of it is when you go that route and it's completed, you know there is a court order saying it's yours.
Right.
And it cuts off all rights.
And that ends the
That
uncertainty.
ends it, yes, sir.
So then I guess, I think really the decision before us is our role in terms of repairing it as lessee of the dam, whereby the bridge that we own sits on top of that. So,
But we're just approving the 100 and some odd thousand, right?
correct, this is to create the design, which ultimately allow Ed to go forward and get the necessary approvals, put it out to bid, and likely 8 or 9 months from now, have a biddable contract, which we would then appropriate whatever those.
And in the meantime, if the Board of Selectmen moves, they
Yes.
can do the rest of the work and keep the ball rolling.
Yes, so that process with the Board of Selectmen in terms of some type of land acquisition may or may not be done in 8 to 9 months.
Well, it certainly could be started.
Got it.
And throughout the process of the design, I will keep an eye on the funding aspects of it to see that we keep the insurance payment and keep it rolling down to finding a funding source eventually for it. Last but not least, coming to the Board of Finance.
Okay. 'Cause I think that's particular, to the extent we were to bond this, and the bonding were to occur, like if the project's gonna take 7 to 9 months to get approved, and our lease is expiring in 10 months or 9 months, we should also probably look in the bond council, just kind of see what issues, if anything, there are, in terms of if we could ever bond that repair, if our
If the
lease
lease is expired?
expired, yeah.
And we haven't yet exercised eminent domain. Eminent domain's not yet in force, right?
Or hasn't been completed, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not in force.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions?
Before you vote on this, the way this is written, it is a special appropriation out of the general fund balance, because that's what we originally brought forward in February. When we had our budget meeting, I briefly mentioned that you should consider paying for this, or transferring this out of your Board of Finance capital reserve, just to expedite, because we're 2 months on from when Ed originally needed the funding. So that is a discussion that you can have if you want to move it from Board of Finance capital reserve. You would just need to change the source of funding on this.
What's our current balance on the Board of Finance capital reserve? Approximate.
I think it was around, when we talked about it in terms of the budget, it assumed the 160 was coming out of here, and I think it brought us down to 300-ish,
Yeah.
And that included,
assuming that this was out.
assuming this was
Yep.
funded from it, okay.
And they'd have to wait another month to go to RTM?
If we could make it onto rules agenda for Monday, it would make it to the May 9th RTM, and then a 10-day waiting period before it became effective. So
I mean-
essentially another month before Ed could do anything.
I mean, this was pretty clear that we had this during the budget process. We had this sort of mapped out as coming dirt out of our capital account. I think that's one of the reasons why we only contributed was $100,000
Right.
from our Board of Finance capital reserve, because we saw we had this earmark to kind of come out of this. I mean, I think, listen, I feel like it's unfortunate that we sort of delayed this for 2 months. It's an asset we need to fix, and I think now we've determined that we're legally responsible to fix it. So I do feel like this is something, this is the design of it. I think this is something I feel comfortable taking out of our capital reserve.
Do we need a motion for that?
That, it would just be the motion that you approve is
Okay,
to
so
transfer
modify the motion.
160,000 from, yeah.
So I guess, is there a motion to contribute $160,000 from the Board of Finance's capital reserve within the reserve fund for capital non-recurring expenses to the account number listed on this page for purposes of the design of a repair program for the Gorham Pond Dam?
Can we just hear, before we take it out of the RTM's hands, like 1 month is something you don't want to wait another month, right?
I would prefer not to.
Okay.
I think we've waited a little bit here, and rightfully so. I think the ownership was very important to you folks, and it was important to me. I couldn't answer those questions for you. But I want to get started on this as soon as possible. A lot of the consultants right now are working on a lot of different things. They've slated time for us to do this, and I want to keep them going. Good question.
Okay, good question. So, moved, Dan moves. John second. All those in favor? All those opposed? Okay, it's unanimous, 5 attending.
That's to
you.
take it from capital, do we have to vote on doing it?
We did.
That
We
was the
did.
motion.
The motion was to take it from capital
All at
reserve.
once, okay.
I will leave with Jen our memo for your.
Yeah, the minutes should reflect.
Information on it,
Right.
and the extra copies of the basic case folks.
Great. And then you'll keep things moving on the either insurance and/or FEMA reimbursement?
Yes. So, thank you very much. Thank you for having a special meeting.
Thank you guys for all this work that you did. I know it was a sort of large fish finding.
It's been interesting.
Yeah, quote, unquote.
Or don't quote her on that. Good evening, thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Brian.
So the next item on our agenda is another transfer related to the Parks and Rec facility repair and maintenance of $15,000 to deal with painting the paddle hut facility at Weed Beach. This is something I think we discussed as part of the review of the Board of Selectmen's budget, and I think this is something that I think was not originally included in the Board of Selectmen's budget. The town administrator did not put it forward as they were trying to sort of understand and manage the overall budget. I think once it was known that we were able to approve a lot of the other smaller capital items and so forth with some of the ARPA funding, is when we all started discussing this, and I think there seemed to be a lot of support for getting this done now. And so this is, I think Jen sent around pictures of what it looked like. I mean, it was very obvious from the, looking at sort of the shingles of the gable ends and so forth, that this was it definitely in need of repair.
Obvious when you drive down there.
Yeah.
Yep. This was originally in the department head's request, but removed by the town administrator
Correct.
and not reinserted by the Board of Selectmen.
Correct.
But the Board of Selectmen has since,
They approved this
They
transfer
approved-
request yesterday,
Right.
so they do support it.
so I think while we sort of identified it, this is formally went through the Board of Selectmen.
Right.
And this is really their request.
There's no reason our parks and the facility shouldn't be in a condition befitting this town and its residents. And this is what's necessary to make it happen.
Yeah. And I think the chairman of the Parks and Rec Commission sent around their standard of care of kind of how they desire to keep their facilities and so forth. And this all seems to be right in the, fit right into that. So, I'm in favor of that. Any other discussion? Do we know if is Taylor right out there?
Yes.
Okay.
On that note.
So, Taylor, any discussion on the $15,000 transfer to basically paint the paddle hut?
No.
Okay. Is there a motion?
So moved.
John so moved, Rob seconded. All those in favor? All those opposed? It's unanimous, 5 of 5. Okay.
The only thing I would say is that I think it was an extremely good exercise to go visit the fire departments. And Parks and Rec had suggested we go down and take a look at some of the things they want to do. I think there'd be an awfully good idea this coming year, as needs begin to arise, to get more involved with the people that are asking for the money, and so that we can see firsthand what they're asking for.
And we've had some email communication. I think that's definitely on the calendar for next year. And I think we've also asked them to begin to think about putting together really their own 5-year forecast, if you will, sort of capital, what needs to get done, so we can begin to stage that the same way that the Board of Ed does.
We have a 6-year capital plan
For
on
the-
every department that you do have
for-
access to.
Okay.
It's part of the budget documents.
Okay.
So they already have that plan out there.
That's right. Actually, I take that back. They do have it, and I think what we asked them to do is maybe incorporate some of this. They were talking about some of the invasive species
Right.
things. I think we asked them to incorporate that into the 5-year plan.
Right.
Right, this standard of
Okay.
care initiative
Right.
that has invasive species kind of first and foremost.
Got it. Okay. I guess given that this is a special meeting, there are no other items on the agenda. We can't add anything. So can I take a motion to adjourn? Dan, so moved. Rob seconded. All those in favor? Unanimous.